Welcome to your third lesson for World War II. By the end of this lecture, you will know about Blitzkrieg warfare, Germany's conquests throughout Western Europe, America's role prior to the official entry in the war known as the Arsenal of Democracy, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, and then finally Pearl Harbor. With the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939, World War II started. On one side, you have the Axis powers, which consist of the fascist nations that we've talked about, Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the other side, you have the Allies, which consist of Great Britain, France, and China, and eventually the Soviet Union and United States will also join the Allied powers. After Poland is invaded, Germans unveil a military tactic called Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. They attack the country quickly and heavily before the enemy has time to react. Using this tactic, Germany takes full control of Poland in less than a month. As promised by the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which we covered in the earlier videos, the Soviet Union attacked and seized eastern Poland and the neighboring countries. After Poland fell, the war entered into a quiet period. For the next several months, German troops just kind of sat and watched the French forces on the Maginot Line, which was a defense system that they were building along their border with Germany. Since nothing was happening, the American press labeled this a phony war. However, on April 9, 1940, this phony war came to an end when Hitler launched an attack on Denmark and Norway. Then on May 10, German troops once again moved around the Maginot Line and launched a blitzkrieg on Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. All three countries were quickly overwhelmed. On June 14, German troops entered the city of Paris, and a few days later, France surrendered. In less than 3 months, Hitler had conquered most of Western Europe. Of all the Allies, Great Britain now stood alone. As France was falling, Hitler's next target was Great Britain. Winston Churchill, now Great Britain's Prime Minister, pledged that the British would defend themselves at all costs. The Battle of Britain becomes known as the greatest air assault the world had yet seen. As many as 1,000 planes a day rained bombs on Britain. By the end of 1941, when the German raids had ended, some 20,000 people had been killed and roughly 73,000 injured. As Britain endures bombings on a daily basis, the US and FDR are still practicing the cash and carry method discussed in the earlier video. However, FDR knows that war is on the horizon, and in September of 1940, Congress authorized the first peacetime draft in the nation's history. The Selective Service Act requires all males ages 21 to 36 to register for military service. From this pool, a limited number of men were then selected to serve a year in the Army. In November of 1940, Roosevelt wins re-election to a third term as president, which had never before happened in history. His easy victory encourages him to push even further for American involvement in the war. In January 1941, FDR proposes to provide war supplies to Great Britain without any payment in return. Seems crazy, I know, but FDR's logic was that if your neighbor's house is on fire, you're not going to sell him your hose. You're going to lend it to him and then get it back after the fire is out. So Congress responds by passing the Lend-Lease Act in March of 1941, which authorizes the president to aid any nation whose defense he believed was vital to American security. Roosevelt immediately begins sending aid to Britain, and the U.S. became, as FDR said in a speech, the great arsenal of democracy. In 1941's State of the Union speech, FDR then proposes the 4 fundamental freedoms that people everywhere in the world ought to enjoy: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. In June of 1941, Germany launches a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. In lands they occupied, German troops begin rounding up and executing large numbers of civilians. The Soviets adopted a scorched earth policy, which means that they would destroy everything useful to the enemy as they retreated. In the meantime, Stalin asked Roosevelt for help through the Lend-Lease program. However, Congress blocked this request for many months. American aid did not begin to flow until June of 1942. In August of 1941, unknown to the rest of the world, FDR and the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met off the coast of Newfoundland. Both men believed that the U.S. would soon be allied with Britain in war, and they were meeting to agree on the war's goals. The two leaders pledged a peace that would afford all nations the means of dwelling in safety inside their own boundaries. FDR and Churchill decided not to seek any territorial gain from the war. They decided to support all people when choosing their own form of government, and they wanted to create a system of general security similar to the League of Nations that was created after World War I. As Japan focused on gaining territory, the U.S. was looking for ways to maintain peace with the Asian nation. American officials knew that Japan was planning to seize more territory, and in October of 1941, General Hideki Tojo, who supported war with the United States, became Prime Minister of Japan. Japan's leaders had decided their goals in Asia could not be achieved as long as the American fleet remained in Hawaii. That threat had to be destroyed. Shortly after 7 a.m. on December 7, 1941, an American Army radar operator in Hawaii reported to headquarters that planes were headed toward him. The only officer on duty that Sunday morning decided they were American planes. Less than an hour later, more than 180 Japanese warplanes streaked overhead. Most of the Pacific Fleet lay at anchor in Pearl Harbor, crowded into an area less than 3 miles squared. Japanese planes bombed and attacked with machine gun fire the fleet and airfields nearby. By 9:45, it was over. In less than 2 hours, some 2,400 Americans had been killed and nearly 1,200 wounded. Nearly 300 American warplanes were damaged or destroyed. 18 warships had been sunk or heavily damaged, including 8 of the fleet's 9 battleships. Japan lost only 29 planes. The attack on Pearl Harbor stunned the American people. Calling December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, FDR the next day asked Congress to declare war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. For the second time in the century, Americans were part of a world war. Their contributions would make the difference between victory and defeat for the Allies. After watching the video, you should be able to answer the following 4 questions. How did Germany manage to conquer so many countries in such a short period of time? From 1940 to 1941, what was America's role in assisting the Allies? There were a few different things that they actually did. What is the importance of the Atlantic Charter? And then finally, why did Japan want to attack the United States? What caused Pearl Harbor to actually happen?